Hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Guys, it's the first installment of Mission Marple. I am so excited. I'm also so glad that I took a break after Project Poirot because, I am coming to this new Christie reread with a lot of energy and enthusiasm and just, already delight. Because I haven't reread Marple really probably in about 10 years, so I feel like even more so than the Poirot, this is going to be sort of a rediscovery. And I also have more, proportionately more of her books that I haven't read at all yet, so that'll be fun too. Before we get going, I should just, remind everybody of what we're doing, which is Mission Marple is going to be my 8-month reread of all of the Marple books. We're going to be reading one every other week. I'll have the schedule listed below. I probably won't do that for all videos, but since this is the first one, I thought I would go ahead and do that again. If you want to keep track of what the schedule is, I have it posted in the Goodreads group, which is called Mission Marple Book Club. Definitely feel free to go over there and talk to other people who are joining along in the reread. I'm not super involved, but I'm moderating and, keeping an eye on everything, and yeah, there's been already some great discussion over there, which I've really enjoyed reading, and yeah, we're doing this reread. So that's a reminder of Mission Marple, and then a quick reminder of how I do these review videos. So pretty much same rules apply for this as what I did for Project Poirot, which is I will start the video by giving a brief synopsis of the book, and in that synopsis I will take you up roundabouts to where we find a body. Depending on how far it is into the book, if it's a good ways of the way in, then I'll kind of pick another place to stop. I will talk about characters and character details, and I will talk about themes of the book. And so my lens of this reread is going to be thinking about Miss Marple in terms of sort of the social and cultural history of Agatha Christie's time period. And then also, essentially, the reason I even did Project Poirot was that I was interested to see if and how Christie sort of themes about morality or good, bad, right, wrong, all of that, how it evolved over her books, just because her books cover such a large portion of 20th century British history, and that was just sort of the lens that I was bringing to things. So I will be bringing that same lens to Mission Marple. So that will be sort of the main discussion, and my goal in these is always that if you have not read the book, you could watch the video and hopefully be inspired to read the book and go into it with some themes in mind or some, kind of my thoughts before you read it. For Mission Marple, however, I will then at the end tell you, okay, we're about to do spoilers, and this is where I make no guarantees about any of the Christie canon. I will feel free to spoil anything in Christie at that point, primarily Poirot. What I see is that section being an opportunity for me to make direct comparisons to Poirot. So I make no representations about spoilers at that point, so watch at your own peril, but if you're somebody who's read a lot of Agatha Christie, it shouldn't be a surprise. So all of that preamble, I will not give that to you every time, but I felt like since this was the first one, I kind of needed to do that. So without further ado, let's get in to the synopsis for our first pick, which is The Murder at the Vicarage by Agatha Christie, starring Jane Marple. So this book was written in 1930, and just to kind of orient you in terms of where we are in the timeline, the two previous books to this were The Seven Dials Mystery and The Mystery of the Blue Train. So that's sort of where we are in the timeline overall. In The Mystery of the Blue Train, there is a reference to a little town in what I think we can triangulate to be Berkshire called St. Mary Mead. And so that is where this book is set, and our narrator is Len Clements, who is the local vicar, and hence he lives in the vicarage with his much younger wife, Griselda. I mean, I'm talking he's 45, she's 25. It's a big difference. Also with his nephew, Dennis, who's about 16. And then they have an amazingly inept cook named Mary. So they kind of opens in breakfast with them, and we start getting introduced to the townspeople. So most of the setup that I'll be able to give you is related to characters, so let me just kind of give you a quick rundown. There are a lot, which is handled really well, which I really appreciated in this book. So, characters you need to know about. So first of all, you should know that, so they live in the vicarage, and then the other kind of big house in town, or notable location, is Old Hall, which is sort of the old place where the rich people live, and the main rich person in this case is Colonel Lucius Prothero, who is an absolute asshole. From the jump, you're oh, this is clearly who's gonna get murdered, because who else could? Dude's gotta go. So he's there with his second, also much younger wife, that's a theme here, and Prothero. So that's his second wife. His first wife like ran off basically because he was intolerable, and who can blame her? And he has a daughter from that marriage who's probably about 18-ish, and her name is Lettuce. Now it is spelled in a way that it could be pronounced Lettice, but I declined to take that option, and her name's just gonna be Lettuce. So Lettuce is like very much the 20s. She reminds me a lot of the sort of blasé rich kids from something like Peril at In-House. Like, she's that type. So she's rich and sort of careless and very vague, and really does not like her stepmother. Her stepmother doesn't really seem to like her that much either, but she's at least trying. So there's some friction there. Also, I think he's staying with them, but his studio is at the Vicarage. But there's a young artist in town named Lawrence Redding, and I think he's about 30, and he's like smoking hot, basically. So like, dude can like paint your picture and you'll have something pretty to look at while he makes the pretty picture, apparently. Dude is like smoking hot. So he's around. Who else is around? There is a doctor in town named Dr. Haydick, and he seems to have a special relationship with this old lady, or not old lady, but older woman named Mrs. Lestrange, and she's recently moved to town, and everybody's sort of enamored of her, and like, she's sort of the like kind of helpless female type that I think Christie likes to paint as like men are very susceptible to, because like her vulnerability cries out to them or whatever. So she's around. I should mention that Prothero, Colonel Prothero, is also the church warden. So we got the vicar, the church warden, and then the curate is Hayes, and he is very like high Anglican, so that's creating some friction. Then we also have, there's so many characters in this book. We also have like the little old biddy brigade. So the chief among them, of course, being none other than Miss Jane Marple. This is our first introduction to her. She will become a recurring Christie detective. She lives directly next to the vicarage, so she can see all the kind of comings and goings. But there's also three others. There is Mrs. Weatherby, Mrs. Hartnell, and Mrs. Price Ridley, I think, are the other three ladies. They are fabulous together. I'm going to read you a little scene from the beginning where I guess I'm giving it away. I loved this reread. I loved it so much more than I remember liking it the first time. And they just totally won me over in the first little scene with the four of them. But there's lots of like townspeople around, and those are some of the most notable. The only other people I guess you should know about is that there's Dr. Stone, I think is his name, who's an archaeologist who's in town to do some excavation on like a local like burial mound kind of thing. And he has young secretary named Miss Cram, and there's a lot of scandal around, you know, are they getting it on, basically. A lot of the subtext of this book is, are people boning on the side? Okay, so anyway, those are all the characters. So to finish doing my synopsis here, the opening chapters basically are Lynn Clements, the vicar, is our narrator. He's a delightful narrator, and he starts kind of by having breakfast with his family, and what comes out of that is that there has been some money missing from the collection plate, and Colonel Prothero, as the church warden, has been investigating it and has been like insinuating that either, you know, maybe the vicar did it, or the curate, or somebody on the inside, basically. So that's a little thread that's going. We quickly find out that Lettuce is attracted to Lawrence Redding. So that's a thing. But then we find out very soon after that actually Lawrence Redding and Anne Prothero are into each other, but they haven't like acted on it according to them because she's married and like whatever. And basically the theme throughout all of this, like, Lettuce is in love with Lawrence Redding, but she's like, fuck my dad, he won't let him like hang out with me, and I hate my dad, whatever. Anne Prothero is like, oh, I hate my husband, he's unbearable, I'm in love with Lawrence Redding as well, but like I can't do anything about it. Lawrence Redding hates Prothero because he like feels like he's abusive to Anne, but he ultimately agrees that he should probably just leave town, like at the vicar's kind of prompting. We basically just find out that like pretty much everyone we encounter has a reason to hate Prothero and potentially murder him. And lo and behold, basically pretty soon into the book, Prothero is murdered in the study at the vicarage, hence the murder at the vicarage. He was waiting for Len, the vicar, to come back because the vicar got called away because somebody said they were taken ill. He got there, everybody was fine, so it was sort of potentially like a decoy thing. He gets back, dead dude in the study. Inspector Slack and Colonel Melchett? Yeah, Melchett are the investigators, and they are the fucking worst. We hate them. Then we go from there. Okay. So that is my not so brief synopsis, but there were a lot of characters in this. So let's get into some of my thoughts about this book and some theme analysis. So just like I said, kind of in terms of my gut level, did I like this? I loved it. I mean, I went and looked on Goodreads and saw that originally I gave this book 4 stars, but unquestionably I think this is a 5-star. This to me is like a quintessential what Christie does well. And it's interesting because if you saw my review of The Blue Train, you'll know, The Mystery of the Blue Train, you'll know that that's like one of my least favorite Christies. And my problem in that is that she has such a large cast and she's not managing it very well. This book is the opposite. There's a really large cast, as we just got into, and she really handles them all really well. She finds interesting things to do with all of the characters that she spends any amount of time of like kind of highlighting or developing to us. Like they all have their own like kind of role to play in the story, which I think is a great signal of kind of an ensemble piece. I think she captures sort of like the smallness of village life or small town life really well, where everybody is in each other's business. Everybody like thinks at least that they know everything about everyone. And there's just constant speculation and sort of looking over your shoulder at other people. I think anybody who's ever lived in a kind of small community can kind of relate to the sort of fishbowl aspect of it. I think she captures that really well. I think that this is a really funny book to me. Like, I think that the authorial, because we have Lynn as our narrator, and Lynn I love as a narrator. I frankly kind of wish that all Marple books were told with Lynn and Griselda as sort of the lens and Miss Marple interacting with them, because like I think this is a super effective sort of setup. But he's a great narrator because he is sort of like, he's very Hastings-esque, and I think he works for the same reasons that Hastings works in the Poirot books. He also kind of reminds me of the narrator in Crooked House, where he is not that he's, well, I should say he's much smarter, I think, than Hastings is. He's not dumb, but he is just sort of naive, or like he consistently fails to read the subtext of situations correctly, and he's always very confident that he has read the subtext of things correctly. So he makes a lot of assumptions, and he kind of jumps to various conclusions at various points in this book that I think work also because he's a vicar, and so you kind of have this sense of him as wanting to believe the best in people. Like there's one moment where somebody, Prothero is going on, and Prothero is such a fucking asshole. He like wants to throw somebody in jail or something for a long time because they were poaching off his land, and he's going like, as a clergyman, justice is the thing. And Lynn kind of comes back and says, well, but mercy is also a really important value. And I think he's just a very compassionate and kind-hearted person. The kind of person if you're gonna have like a local, like kind of established religion figure, this would be the kind of guy you want. Like he seems to really care about the people in his village. He takes his job really seriously. I also adore Griselda. Like I want to be Griselda when I grow up. I just love, like, she's so just like self-effacing. I think she doesn't take things too seriously. I find it's interesting to me that there's so many like age discrepancy pairings in this book. I wonder if it's because this is the period where Agatha Christie was meeting and falling in love with a man much younger than herself. I don't know. But I kind of love that she loves how blustery and kind of old manish Lynn is. Like, she finds that really charming. I just love Griselda, basically. She's probably my favorite character in this book. So my thoughts basically are that this is a very charming book, and I think if you know Christie twists and turns, I'm not sure that it's a super shocking conclusion, just because like there's some hallmarks here, which we'll get into in my spoiler section. But overall, I just really, as a book, enjoyed this. And I thought I would just read you, like, the moment where this book on my reread, nailed me and, like, got me. I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna be great. I forgot how much I like this. Was, there's an opening, like, one of the opening scenes is that the little old biddies are over for tea at the vicarage, and they're all gossiping about Dr. Stone and Miss Cram, so he's unmarried and she's his secretary, so like they're just making a lot of insinuations. So this is the scene where I was just like, I love this. Like, this is gonna be great. This is the biddies kind of gossiping amongst themselves with the vicar and his wife. Miss Weatherby said tersely, "No nice girl would do it," and then shut her thin lips disapprovingly. "Do what?" I inquired. "Be a secretary to an unmarried man," said Miss Weatherby in a horrified tone. "Oh, my dear," said Miss Marple, "I think married ones are the worst. Remember poor Molly Carter." "Married men living apart from their wives are, of course, notorious," said Miss Weatherby. "And even some of the ones living with their wives," murmured Miss Marple. "I remember." I interrupted these unsavory remembrances. "But surely," I said, "in these days a girl can take a post in just the same way a man does." To come away to the country and stay in the same hotel, said Mrs. Price Ridley in a severe voice. Miss Weatherby murmured to Miss Marple in a low voice, and all the bedrooms on the same floor. They exchanged glances. Miss Hartnell, who was weather-beaten and jolly and much dreaded by the poor, observed in a loud, hearty voice, "The poor man will be caught before he knows where he is. He is as innocent as a babe unborn. You can see that." "Disgusting, I call it," continued Miss Hartnell, with her usual tactlessness. "The man must be at least 25 years older than she is." 3 female voices rose at once, making disconnected remarks about the choir boys' outing, the regrettable incident at the last mothers' meeting, and the droughts in the church. Miss Marple twinkled at Griselda. "Don't you think," said my wife, "that Miss Cram may just like having an interesting job, and that she considers Dr. Stone just as an employer?" There was a silence. Evidently none of the 4 ladies agreed. Miss Marple broke the silence by patting Griselda on the arm. "My dear," she said, "you are very young. The young have such innocent minds." I just love, I think that just sums up the dynamic of this so well. That scene, I was like, yes, I am gonna be so into this. So getting into some of the themes, I think the one that was most interesting to me in this was just that there's a lot of sort of textual misogyny coming particularly from Prothero, Colonel Melchett, Inspector Slack, those guys. There's a lot of actual misogyny being expressed by those characters, but it's constantly being undercut by the reality of the situation. So there's so much kind of misogyny and ageism against Miss Marple, and she's clearly the most competent one involved. Consistently in this book, the women are running circles around the men, and I think that is it seems to me that has to be purposeful on Christie's part. So yes, I think there's a lot of sort of its timeness in some ways in terms of the attitudes expressed, but I think thematically the author is really kind of taking a jab at that. And even in just that little passage I read aloud to you, I think even Lynn and Griselda, who I think we're meant to sort of see as sympathetic and having the right kind of moral attitude about things, both of them sort of say if she wants to have a job, she can have a job. I don't understand what the problem is. So I think that it was interesting to me to see Agatha Christie kind of playing with that. I think that it happens enough that it had to have been purposeful. I do also just want to mention that I think it's interesting the difference between, and I guess I just hadn't really thought about this before, how Miss Marple is effective as a detective versus Poirot. So in the Poirot books, you constantly heard me referring to xenophobia because that was a big theme in those books. And that's not really a theme at all in this book, and that's because Poirot is able to get people to talk to him because he is an outsider, and he sort of builds a sort of otherness to him that people almost write him off because he's just a foreigner, and so they're not as guarded with him as they should be. And Miss Marple is the opposite. She essentially works by being so on the inside that people don't take her seriously because her function in society is to be sort of a nosy old lady who doesn't actually know what's going on in the world, and she uses that to her advantage. Her kind of ability to detect is contingent on her having this steel trap of a mind that remembers everything that has ever happened in this village and can make comparisons and analogies to past situations to what's going on now. So I kind of enjoyed that contrast of it's a different kind of what you see isn't always the truth, basically, of so Miss Marple on the surface is sort of just this little old lady you can write off, but underneath that she is not one to be fucked with, basically. You don't want to get on her bad side because she just remembers everything and can figure it out. Other just sort of random thoughts are, I love how cynical Miss Marple is. Again, I think that's kind of undercutting some of the misogyny that is kind of textual, is just how cynical she is and how she does not, she just believes the worst in people and basically says that the reason nobody else can figure out what's going on is because they don't believe the worst in people enough. So I thought that was interesting. I do think that this is an interesting shift for Christie because previously we'd had a lot of these sort of bright young things who were heroines. So, I think Bundle, for instance, in the Seven Dials mystery, I love her. She's everything. She is very much a contrast to the kind of heroine that Miss Marple is. So those younger heroines in some of the sort of action adventure type books that she was writing earlier in the 20s, they are very much the spotlight is always on them. They're very much in the mix of things, whereas Miss Marple does her business sort of by being in the middle of things covertly. Like, she's not as kind of attention seeking, basically. The only other thing I thought I would bring up is that it is interesting how we haven't fully gotten to the place where the possibility of divorce is discussed as being something sort of not quite blasé, but just like as being completely a socially acceptable option vis-a-vis like Anne Protheros. So yeah, just a kind of thing to keep an eye on, that it is something that could happen in this period, but it's still kind of gaining momentum as a socially viable option for people. So just something to keep an eye on in Marple as we get there. So yeah, I think that's most of my thoughts, non-spoilery thoughts about the murder at the Vicarage. So now we're going to transition into the spoiler section. So if you would like to leave me now, goodbye. Thank you for watching. And so let's talk about a couple of spoilers with Poirot. Okay, so two things that I wanted to point out. One is that, so when you first start reading this in the first person narration, the other narrator that Lynn Clements sort of reminds me of is the doctor in Murder of Roger Ackroyd, and especially because Roger Ackroyd's sister was the inspiration for Miss Marple. You definitely have a moment in this book of wondering if it's the same twist as what happens in Ackroyd. So I did spend some of this book, like, I knew that he didn't, but I was like, you could totally read this if you'd already read Ackroyd, wondering if Lynn Clements was truly the one who did it. And I think Christie sort of has fun playing with that a little bit. The other spoilery thing that I wanted to bring up was this as being very similar in my mind to the Mysterious Affair at Styles. So this idea of the two people, or the person, at least in Mysterious Affair at Styles, that you first suspect being the ones who ultimately did it. This idea of kind of being in collusion, and it's parallel and opposite at the same time. So in the Mysterious Affair at Styles, you have Alfred and the secretary ostensibly hating each other, but actually being in collusion, and Alfred being set up to essentially get double jeopardy was their sort of strategy for it, versus in this book, Anne and Lawrence Redding kind of working together because they're in love, but the idea being that they can sort of like indemnify each other against it, kind of a thing. So anyway, I just thought it was interesting that the first book for Poirot and the first book for Marple, I think, have a lot of sort of like structural similarities to them in terms of the actual murder, and also just the idea of like there being an object that's hidden that has to be dealt with, and that's sort of being their downfall. So I think there's a lot of parallels there between those two books, so I just wanted to point that out. So yeah, that was my first Mission Marple for the Murder at the Vicarage. Very exciting. In 2 weeks' time, we are going to talk about the 13 Problems, which going into this project was what I remembered as being my favorite, just because I love Miss Marple short stories. Like, that tends to be where I think she works the best. So I've started reading, and so far very excited, but stay tuned. In 2 weeks, we will talk about the 13 Problems. Yay! Mission Marple is now in full effect, so definitely join us over on the Goodreads group if you're interested in chatting with other people as you're reading along. But otherwise, I will see you in 2 weeks. So, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you guys are having a really lovely day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!